This is RetroCultCast. It is I don't really know what we're doing yet. We're just talking about popular culture. We're interviewing authors. We're kind of interested in like older popular culture, but we also like neglected popular culture. So stuff that's a couple years old that people don't talk about that's good. I don't know. This is episode 14, so we're still figuring out what the focus is. But um, yeah, that's the introduction, and we're going to be talking about Robocop, 1987 today. And I'm Jason. And you want to introduce yourself, Nicole?
Yeah, I'm Nicole.
Cal, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Baldari, professor of ethics, um, with a focus on, in recent years, pop culture and pop literature, especially as it applies to speculative fiction.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Actually, you're on an episode. We talked about Mandy. I think that was episode 2, but we do these so irregularly. Yeah, that's interesting. Episode 2 or 3. At one point, you and I talked about Mandy, but
I'm aware. I was there.
okay, yeah, yeah. So how should we begin? Uh, Maybe a little summary of the film.
Go for it.
Yeah, if you had to summarize the film in like just a few sentences, how would you be able to encapsulate everything that is this film in a very brief statement?
We're going to assume everybody has seen this, by the way. So no spoiler protection. Yeah. Were you asking me, Nicole?
I was asking either of you.
Oh, well, it takes place in the near future, a kind of dystopic cyberpunk future. There is a corporation, Omni Consumer Products. It has like the coolest evil corporation name, and they are now in charge of the police department in Detroit. There's a lot of bad crime. Our main character is a cop named Murphy, or Murph, I think is his nickname, and he gets killed by a gang of horrible people. And there is a strike brewing in the police department, and so the Omni Consumer Products Corporation are anticipating the strike, and so they are like trying to be sneaky, and so they're like, well, we need to come up with like some sort of robotic, substitute for these police officers. And so there's actually two plans. One is this Ed 209 robot, which we all know what that looks like. He kind of looks like a mech warrior if you're familiar with that game. He has a real deep voice. And then the other is a more experimental plan, which is a cyborg, human elements. And well, when Murph gets killed by this gang, he gets turned into Robocop. Fast forward, Robocop is kind of going around, quote unquote, cleaning up Detroit, but there's some malfunctions. He's supposed to have had all of his memories erased, but slowly but surely his memories start to seep into his consciousness, and then lo and behold, he remembers everything, and he starts trying to get vengeance or whatever for his death. But alas, I think I'm remembering this correctly. The gang, led by the character Clarence Boddicker, is actually basically they're like black ops for Omni Consumer Products. They've been helping them do bad things, and so Robocop wants to get vengeance, because they're drug dealers, crooks, and everything, but he can't because he's been programmed not to harm anybody who's an employee of Omni Consumer Products. So that leads into him kind of being at odds with the very corporation that created him. That's resolved. He, figures out a way of getting around the programming. As he's threatening the guy, his boss fires him at the very end, and then he kills I forget the name of the real bad guy. He's do you guys remember the name of the Richard Sampson is his name?
Dick Jones.
Dick Jones. Dick Jones. Why did I say Richard Sampson?
I don't know.
Anyhow, Dick Jones is the guy who is he created Ed 209. Is that correct?
Well, he was the head of that project.
Yeah, and then you had the other guy who was Bob, who he was behind the RoboCop program, and they kind of butt heads. Actually, Dick Jones ends up killing Bob. Am I jogging memories?
Yeah.
if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of bring some of that back to more conventional thought on some of those ideas.
Okay.
For instance, it's generally, while there is some revenge elements, it's less about revenge and more about bringing these entities that were seemingly untouchable to justice, right? Because that's what he's all about. So he was chasing them down because they got away with killing him. Of course, they were the focus because, they're everything that he knows. Everything else is programming, but he knows these people. Prior to being kind of reminded that these were the guys that were responsible, he went on a massive programmed spree cleaning up Detroit. So there's less less of this kind of revenge tale and more of this kind of a idealistic super cop going on a justice spree, if you will. Of course, there are certain revenge elements, especially as he gets his hands on the individuals. We see various bits and pieces where that comes out, but that's part of his. That's part of the arc. It's part of him regaining his humanity. Whether that is a good or bad thing might be up for debate. But once he starts to take it personally, that's where you kind of see that humanity leaking back in, whereas before it was just robotic. Also, you'd mentioned something about the Blackout Ops arm, which I thought was kind of interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way before, but it is a kind of partnership between Dick Jones specifically. The old man doesn't know anything about it.
Oh, that's a good point.
But for Dick Jones's plans, they do a lot of the dirty work, but they're doing it for themselves, not for they're not getting paid necessarily. Yeah. They're just being allowed to do what they want to do.
And he makes some promises or something when they build Delta City. If he goes and finds Robocop and kills him, then they're going to. He's going to. I forget the nature of the promise, but the gangs are going to be allowed to have some sort of influence in the new city they're going to build on the ruins of old Detroit.
So, one of the things that I was thinking about, and I don't know if either of you can speak to this, is actually it's a two-part thought. How does this film reflect the late 80s that it was, produced and released in, but how does it still apply or appeal to viewers today? I can't do math this quickly. 26 years later? 26 years later? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can speak a little bit to that. So in 85, when writing had kind of been finished and they were shopping around the directors, they were coming off of a spree of kind of these science fiction, near future cyberpunk, the kind of birth of cinematic cyberpunk, right? Mm-hmm. So we had things like Terminator and Aliens and Predator was coming around at the time. So there's all these films that are popping up.
Blade Runner. Was it Blade Runner 82?
So Blade Runner 82 was the inspiration, but it's, we're talking 4 or 5 years earlier. So, the newer stuff was the ones that they were trying to kind of catch the bandwagon of, because they were making money at the time. Mm-hmm. So they pop in, they make a film that is supposed to be the Detroit to Blade Runner's Los Angeles, right? Kind of in the same vein. The difference is, you never hear anything about space travel really in Robocop. In fact, Robocop is kind of way more near future than some of those other films. Terminator is probably one of the closest of kind of an inverted version
Mm-hmm.
of this, where they really wanted to kind of capitalize on that cyborg element.
Mm-hmm.
So it was coming in on that, and then of course Verhoeven wanted, like, he wanted social commentary, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the film was written satirically, so that was the whole point. Uh, of course, coming right off of Blade Runner. So Reaganomics is a big thing in that era, right? So you've got this, greed is good is the kind of the mantra of the 80s, especially um, like coming off of that second term. A really powerful element in just American everything. Um, so, you know, getting this super greedy company that, and it is a depiction of a megacorp, right? OCP is a megacorp. They're trying to buy a town, for Christ's sakes.
Mm-hmm.
Not a town, but like a major U.S. city.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that could even happen is an interesting piece of commentary. Um,
Or the
again, coming off of
privatization of the police department is a really interesting commentary too.
the fact that we we have done it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Prisons are currently privatized all over the place.
Oh, in Columbus, Ohio, Nationwide Insurance Company owns a district called the Nationwide District, and the Nationwide Security are the police officers for that area. And played a lot of Shadowrun and read a lot of cyberpunk, and I was like, man, that's like a very cyberpunk thing that Nationwide Security they actually have a police department. I don't know if that's still the case today, but Nicole can vouch for that.
Like, the fact that can even happen is just mind-boggling. But what are you going to do if you drive your country with money? Then money is going to drive your company or your country. But yeah, so it's coming off of all of that, and especially they're looking for money, right? This is about money, about making money on their film. So having a movie that fits in with these moderate earners, these aren't major blockbuster, um, breaking records type movies, but they're consistent. They're consistently making money, consistently making money. During that year, there were a number of pretty kind of highly anticipated movies, and RoboCop was just supposed to kind of smooth in there and make some money in the kind of the middle of the summer, when all these other movies were kind of on both sides uh, of the summer. So it's kind of smoothed in there with Cinderella, or was there Snow White? Snow White. Um, it's kind of um, captured a lot of audiences, and the critical reviews were amazing, just absolutely amazing,
Mm-hmm.
because this is all near memory stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, these people are living in this Reagan era, so OCP doesn't seem that weird. It seems like it's a feasibility, almost. It's actually possible, not just a feasibility of like a possible reality, but a likely. We're seeing the birth of it already. So they're like, oh, I can kind of see, and the ultraviolence is equally part of that commentary. Like, is this the future of corporate America, right? And it's kind of a shame to say that we do see that all too much.
Hmm. Do you have any thoughts, Nicole?
No, I mean, a lot of what Cal talked about, I was thinking about when we rewatched the movie. I was very young in the, mid to late 80s, so I don't have like a clear memory of it, or I don't remember what it was like, especially from like an adult perspective and like from a political perspective. But I mean, I think some things that still might resonate now are, yeah, like violence in cities in particular, and I just think it's telling that like Detroit is still considered this really unsafe town, though I don't believe it has the highest murder per capita in the United States. It's obviously still it has a reputation of being very unsafe and crime ridden. So
Okay.
it's just interesting how maybe I don't know how much I haven't been to Detroit, but living in Ohio, we heard about that, quite a bit. And I'm also just thinking about like the perceptions of police, in like, and I know they remade this movie, which we won't talk about the remake. Um,
Thank you.
yeah,
Hey, I like the remake, but it's not as good as
no,
the original. But
You could
yeah,
just say it's not as good and just
yeah.
stop there.
Yeah.
but
I
um,
mean, it does violate a lot of the philosophical, interesting ideas
I thought we
in
weren't going
the.
to talk about that
Sorry,
movie.
yeah, we're
I'm
not
just saying.
talking about it.
Okay. Okay.
No, I only bring it up because it was remade in the recentish past, in like the past 10ish years. But then, especially what happened during COVID and everything, this kind of like focus on police brutality, how police are being trained, how they respond in certain situations. I'm just like, and I don't have an answer for this, but it was just something I was thinking about. Like, you know, how much of this might be still like in a way offering a kind of commentary about what we're still talking about, you know, again, like 35 years later. And so it's like, as much as things have changed, they've generally stayed the same, which is something that's I always forget about. But then I go back and I watch older movies and I'm like, oh no, this was an issue then and it's still an issue now. Why haven't we figured anything out?
I was you mentioned the violence. Like when I remember this movie from the I watched it like on VHS, probably recorded on TV. Well, no, it would have been recorded on TV because I remember clearly the spike in the neck. That would not have been on primetime TV. At the very end, I remember, and the blood is kind of gushing out. And I also remember, I forget his name. He's the gangster. He drives into the toxic waste, and he's walking out of the toxic waste, and he's like
So that's a
melting.
meal.
Okay, there you go.
Nash is
And
the one that's driving when Emil ends.
smashes into the toxic. But when he's like this kind of, almost like melting human like that, like just kind of terrified me as a child. But I do think, not to overinterpret, but this idea that like, the Ed 209 is this out of control, weapon, right? That like basically like police departments, we were concerned, like there was commentary recently about police departments having military style vehicles, like basically like too much weaponry. And if you have that level of weaponry, you're going to use that weaponry. You're going to, you know what I mean? Like the tool will direct behavior in some way. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
When you have a hammer, the whole world's a nail.
yeah.
Yeah, the militarization of police is definitely something that I think travels like that. That kind of transcends the years. Um, but at the same time, there is a reversal. We kind of see um, the consequences of like rampant like crime that doesn't get properly solved. It's not considered to be the most important, or it's given a free pass. So there's a lot of impunity, especially in the 80s. There was a lot of impunity for people to act a fool, right? They were just able to get away with more than we saw reported in the 70s, right? So it was something that was becoming kind of a national topic. So you get the 70s where everything was kind of behind the veil. There was a lot of racial violence and a lot of injustice in that way. But and don't get me wrong, that is its own topic. But the idea of actual criminals, regardless of race or anything like that, being able to get away with things that in prior years nobody could even imagine, right? Unless it was like a literal gangster film.
Mm-hmm.
Was that's a theme. Like that's an important element of the conversation when we talk about violence today, because it's like nowadays a police officer, they if they even have a viable shred of a doubt that somebody's armed, they can get away with murder, like literally get away with murder. Whereas in the even as late as the late 90s, the mid to late 90s, like the idea of like drawing and shooting first ever was just something that was it was unheard of. Like you didn't hear about that kind of thing. Like somebody had to really be in immediate imminent danger for them to be able, as far as like police and stuff like that, in order for them to pull that trigger, or it was all over. Like that was it. Not necessarily that you would lose your job or anything like that, but you definitely weren't on the street ever again.
Hmm.
It was the same era, right? We see that with Die Hard. We have a police officer that, in this case, nowadays, a 12-year-old pulls a ray gun, as he said in the movie, right? Mm-hmm. And a cop takes him down. It's like he's back on the street. Like everybody's like, "Okay, good job, well done," and that's that.
I forgot about that part of Die Hard when he tells the story.
It's a poignant piece, and I think that has a lot to do with some of the impunity of crime as it was growing and becoming more violent, more immediate, kind of New Jack City style, where it was in everybody's face. It was in the media. It was a conversation. It was being glorified in some ways. Not that didn't happen in the 40s and stuff like that when we had to deal with some of those problems, but it was still, we've got all these kinds of violent elements going on that are being glorified, and the cops are taking the brunt of it. And they're being hailed as heroes for taking the brunt of it. So we see this start to shift from they're heroes because they take the brunt of it, and now they're heroes because they're taking them out, right? It's like, if you want to be glorified as a cop, you have to kill the bad guy, right? You have to, well, he's not going to be a burden to society anymore. Yeah, but really?
Dirty Harry.
So, yes, I think there's some of that in there too, but I think that's a separate conversation. I wouldn't want to get too sidetracked on that because it is a long and interesting conversation. But at least in Robocop, right? When we see the scene with both Murphy and Lewis, both of them are like, freeze, right? They've got armed criminals in front of them, and they're like, freeze. That doesn't happen today. Like, we don't hear about it. It's not that it doesn't happen. I shouldn't say that, but we don't hear about those stories, right? We don't hear about the cops that are able to take them in alive. We hear about the ones that are like, from 3 blocks away, I noticed a guy had something that looked like a rifle. So I set up a sniper nest and I took him out. Right. The idea that, especially for like Anne, that guy like had his stuff right there. It was out and open. Murphy was the same way. Like he just walks in the middle of all of them. It's like you don't see that kind of stuff anymore, and it kind of adds an interesting heroic element. So
I want to say something about Murphy's the massacre of Murphy, the initial massacre of Murphy, because there is a reversal of that scene when Robocop has kind of went rogue and he's leaving. I think he's leaving OCP's building, and the cops have surrounded, and they start shooting him. Like all the cops, there's actually like some like argument about should they shoot him or not. But like, if you're a film nerd, I would argue that that's like he's being shot by all the criminals at one point, but now he's being shot by all the cops. So I don't know if Verhoeven, did I say that correct?
Yeah.
If the director intended that match to mean anything, but it seemed really intriguing. Like something like I'm going to be nerdy here, and you need to chime in, Nicole, because I don't want to feel like you don't have I don't want to be dominating conversation. But I was thinking about how like this is Murphy is this kind of vulnerable individual who finds himself in this kind of system or machine, meat grinder, which is composed of corporate America, criminal syndicates, and the police state, and Murphy's just kind of like processed through it like a meat grinder. Like this is like society is this like, I don't know if that makes any sense. Like that, it's like in this dystopic future, you're just, you're going to get like chewed up and spit out. I don't know if that makes any sense, because I think that it's kind of very skillfully collapsing like the quote unquote sides in the film. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I didn't see it as
Idealism is a
meat
major theme.
grinder. Oh, what'd you say, Cal?
I said idealism is a major theme in the movie. Like
If you're an idealist, that's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking if, and I don't remember what the film term is, but that kind of return to the massacre. Only now it's the cops. Like then I'm just seeing a conflation between like who are the bad guys, right? Like anything could turn a so-called good guy into a bad guy. That's how I read that scene. And then RoboCop / Murphy is kind of put in this weird space of like, well, then what is he, right? Like, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Because he went to OCP to try to arrest, shoot, I'm blanking on the character's
Dick
name.
Jones.
Yeah, Dick Jones. I don't know why we can't remember his name. He's going to go try to arrest him after the confession that Clarence had when he was throwing him through many windows. There was a great scene, right? And he's like, hey, it's not me, it's Dick Jones.
RoboCop was engaging in enhanced interrogation techniques.
Yeah, sure. But I will say too, like I was thinking about this, it's like there's that directive where he has to uphold the law. He can't kill Clarence, right? And he can't kill Dick. Well, the OCP secret directive is part of that, but he can't go the step where he's actually killing the bad guys. He's stopping there. He's bringing them in alive. Like that does seem to be such it's one of his directives, right? So it's very explicit in the film. Like he's not going to cross a line that again in our contemporary mediascape that we see often. And like you were talking about, Cal, right? Like we hear about cops that are using excessive force and more all the time, more than we hear about the cops that aren't.
Yeah, so I read this just a little bit differently as far as like the return. What I saw was more of a shift as Murphy becomes the good guy, right? So we start off with Murphy's the idealist. He's coming from this clean department and everything like that, this clean precinct, or less troublesome, let's say, into this beleaguered precinct that is having a real problem with OCP, right? They're having a real hard time because OCP is taking over, right? So RoboCop rises, right? This becomes a product. He's out there doing the job. There's going to be, anytime you have somebody stepping on your toes, there's going to be something like underlying. So there's a little bit of resentment. I'm sure that plays a little bit of a part, but the part that I found most poignant was that OCP's now taken full control of the police. So now the police are the bad guys. Mm-hmm. So you go from the police are kind of universal force, right? We all understand that the cops are there to help us, right? They're the serve and protect, all that kind of thing. But that's been eroded and eroded and eroded until the point that when they get the order to kill RoboCop, like there's a couple people that raise concerns, but in the end, they're all pulling that trigger. They're all OCP. So, OCP is the enemy from the beginning to the very end, and they keep picking up more and more aggregates to throw against, this creation that they made, and the directives that he has don't offer room. Well, Nicole, you were talking about this. The directives don't give him any room to uninterpret certain elements, right? He's got to stick with some of these elements. But at the same time, how do you uphold the law when that's the law? That's what the law is doing. And that's because that was the order. They were given the order to take him out. And they don't know why, for the most part.
Oh man, does that mean that in this film, RoboCop goes from being a police officer to at the end he's kind of a criminal?
He's definitely a bit of a vigilante. I guess would be a well. I don't know. It's hard to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he is protecting the law from the very beginning to the very end
Mm-hmm.
implies that he's the only one that's a cop at the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he no longer has that kind of governmental backing, that he's been kind of shunted to the side, is a fairly classic element of the rogue cop concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this case, they make it a little more poignant by he's got these directives that he can't breach. So pretty interesting stuff. When he's fleeing, so I always thought it was kind of interesting that Ed 209 could take a shot at him and he was okay, but when you get some cops shooting regular bullets at him, he's like, "Oh my god, I'm getting my butt kicked."
Hey, there was a lot of cops though.
I mean, I could throw a lot of pellets at you, and they're not ever going to really do anything. They might be irritating, but that aside, the point being that he was like now being attacked by what he thought was the the ones that would have his back. Um, just kind of shows that heel turn for the police in general. At the beginning, we sympathize with them. Let's strike. We're getting tore up. We're not getting supported. So those cops that are like, you know what, if we want support, if we want to get taken care of, we need to appease OCP, not the people, not protect the public. We need to appease OCP. So I think it's an interesting concept. I think all three interpretations are valuable.
Should
What do
we
you think
wrap
about that?
up? We're about at the 30-minute mark.
Yeah, yeah, there are a lot of we could talk. We didn't really talk about the kind of the philosophy of the cyborg. Like the the interesting way that like what does it mean to be human? You mentioned at the very beginning that like it's when he starts wanting vengeance that we start to see that he's actually you know becoming human. Like that's something we didn't explore. Maybe we don't have time for, but I find it intriguing that like when he starts doing something that we kind of traditionally see as bad, like vengeance is not good, right? That's when he's showing his, and I think it's interesting how like this goes back to even in Blade Runner, where like the replicants sometimes they become almost more human than human because of their flaws, right? Humanity is defined by its being unto death, but the replicants their lives are extremely short and therefore they're slightly more human. They see things that we don't see, Roy Batty. But so I think it's interesting that once again we have this theme of like the you know the when he stops thinking about the law as this like math problem, this algorithm that this heuristic that he just processes things through. When he starts actually use the term taking it personal, that's when we start admiring him as like a human. I find that really intriguing and kind of I'm not really sure what to do with that. It's like maybe like it's like when we are when we are friends with someone, if they seem too perfect, we're suspicious of them. But then when they have like when they reveal like a vice or something, we're like, oh, they're just like there's something endearing about when somebody reveals like a crack in their facade. But but I also want to talk about like. I mean, we don't have time to talk about this, but I was thinking about the arcade game, the RoboCop arcade. It's almost a non sequitur, but it's not. That was an awesome arcade game. I don't know if you remember.
Well,
I
You guys know
don't
what I'm
think
should
talking
I
about?
be
played that.
we should make this a two-parter then,
Okay.
because there's a lot of things we didn't touch.
Yeah.
Transhumanism in general, the idea of the cyborg as an entity,
Mm-hmm.
Ed 209 as an entity.
Mm-hmm.
Is that AI? Does that count as AI? Does Ed 209 have rights? Does RoboCop have rights? There's all kinds of fun stuff that like you
The
can
thing that
really.
I was thinking about with this that I've never thought about, I've watched the movie, numerous times, is like, what if the RoboCop, like, what if Murphy had been a woman? I think that would have been really interesting too, especially because like there is reference to his family and his wife and his son, but um, not. I mean, I'm sure it would be very different if the main character had been a woman and a wife and a mother. and then that brings up a whole other kind of set. Like maybe we're okay with seeing like a male character kind of transformed into this cyborg. Maybe we wouldn't have been as comfortable seeing a woman, and it's because we have Anne, right, as a female cop who's very competent and also wants to uphold the law and do the right thing. So we have that female presence in the movie. I don't know, and this is just obviously a speculative kind of line of thought, but what kind of movie would it be if RoboCop had been a woman?
Yeah, it's science fiction when there are I can think of like female androids, but they tend to just be, they're very often companions, or female artificial intelligences, female robots. They tend to be companions for men.
Well, like unless we're talking about Terminator.
Yeah,
not so much.
Yeah, but then well, when they're female, like I'm thinking like that what's it called? That X-Files, not X-Files, Twilight Zone episode, The Lonely, where the engineer is on the meteorite by himself, and so he builds himself a robot companion. But that's not the same as a cyborg. I mean, the only female cyborg I can think of is the Borg Queen. But then again, she's not really a cyborg either, because she's kind of like she's like the Borg. Like she's not a female humanoid that has been assimilated. She's something different. She's a
this isn't a cyborg either, and we're getting way off topic, and we probably should.
We need a part 2.
Yeah,
we'll do a RoboCop part 2.
Well, we could continue to chat. You could turn the recording on. That part's easy.
But
you were going to speak, Nicole.
Oh, I was just going to say the other movie that I'm thinking about with like a female lead is Ex Machina, right? But that's like a...
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's not a cyborg. It's completely a robot.
She's an android.
Yeah, she's an android that has taken on a more feminine persona, because that was what is kind of like what Jason was just talking about, right? Like she was built to be a companion, a companion. So,
but she uses her charisma. She uses her companionship to kind of liberate herself. It's like she like sneaks. She pulls like a she's like a, what's that plant that gives you sugary sweets, but you fall in a pitcher plant. She's like a pitcher plant. Like if you're a fly.
So we see a lot of it in Westworld too.
Oh yeah.
That same kind of element where you've got a companion that uses that for the express purpose of finding freedom and finding yourself. Which is unfortunate, because there's so many other things that we could be exploring, including all the things that we explore when it's a male persona, right? Mm-hmm. Like, think of movies like, iRobot, when we have a completely androgynous entity that still kind of has this male-centric personality, which is, it's unfortunate. Like, why is that always going to be the case? So I think it would be really interesting to see a RoboCop where, after Anne got her leg shot up, she ended up like cybernetically enhanced, right? Mm-hmm. Things like that would be really interesting to see. And there was a lot of speculation at the time. So I was, when RoboCop came out, I was 12. So I was just old enough to, think about these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And I was really excited. RoboCop was my favorite movie for a really long time. And thinking about that element of what's going to come next. Because when RoboCop 2 got announced, when it became a kind of conversation, of course, the speculation went wild. What can they do from here? What could possibly be the next step? And we all thought that didn't come until much later. Like RoboCop 2 is actually a legitimately decent movie. Like, it's not comparable to 1, but the commentary in that and the visuals and all that, still fun. Like, it's still a good movie, and it's still got a lot in there to talk about. I don't want to go down that route because it is by itself a conversation. The idea of drugs for control and like more power, MOAR, more power. All of that kind of stuff is just the idea that you need a minigun on a police robot. That seemed a little extreme. I mean, bad enough we had 50 cows and rocket launchers on Ed 209, but
Well, if you're jaywalking, man, you know, you need that minigun. That well, we're so to the audience now. This is we're still figuring out how to do this. This was our episode on RoboCop, and I'm going to ask Cal, and will you come back, Cal, and do another episode? Okay, all right. So we'll do more with Cal. All right. Any last comments?
No.
Okay.
Thank you for the
Don't-
fun discussion.
don't see the remake.
Don't see the remake.
Yeah,
Okay.
don't
Yeah.
see the remake.
Okay. I think you should maybe see it if you want to.
No.
But anyhow, bye bye.